Welcome to a webinar on identifying and documenting impairment-related work expenses, or IRWEs, and subsidies for people who get Title II benefits. There are 6 learning objectives. First, to explain why benefit to work coaches might help identify and document IRWEs and subsidies working along with benefits planners. To identify your role regarding IRWEs and subsidies. To list the steps to identify and document IRWEs, to list the steps to identify and document subsidies provided by supported employment providers, these are known as special conditions, to list the steps to identify and document subsidies provided by employers, and to evaluate the impact of IRWEs, subsidies, and special conditions on determining whether a person is doing substantial gainful activity, or SGA. So the first question is, should you as a benefit to work coach be doing this at all? You might ask, aren't I supposed to refer people to a benefit to work coach if they may need to use specialized work incentives like IRWEs and subsidies? And the answer is yes, you should. But identifying and documenting IRWEs and subsidies is often a joint effort that may require help from a benefit to work coach working collaboratively with a benefit planner, particularly if the benefit to work coach works for or with a supported employment provider that's serving the individual. So if you're a benefit to work coach, you work with a supported employment provider, you're going to be in a great position to help document particularly subsidies, especially those provided by the supported employment provider, but also to be helpful in documenting those provided by the employer. Also, you'll see that in the Benefit to Work Coaching Guide on page 6, it explains that you as a benefit to work coach should be helping the individual along with a benefit expert, otherwise known as a benefit planner, to implement specialized work incentives such as IRWEs and subsidies. So, why do you need to cooperate with benefit planners? Because although benefit planners take the lead in documenting specialized work incentives like IRWEs and subsidies, they are not always ideally positioned to document them independently. Now, benefit planners can often help individuals document IRWEs without your help, but many people will need more than IRWEs to keep their earnings below SGA. They'll also need subsidies. Now, if you work for a supported employment provider that provides job coaching, that's a kind of subsidy known as a special condition. And you, working for the supported employment provider that provides the service, are going to be in a great position to help document that special condition. Also, if you work with the supported employment provider that has a relationship with the employer that may be providing subsidies, you'll probably be in a better position to speak with the employer about documenting those subsidies than the benefit planner would, who doesn't have a relationship with the employer. So subsidies generally take 2 forms, those that are provided by employers and those that are provided by supported employment providers. Those that are provided by employers actually take 2 forms. There could be extra help or supervision that's provided by the employer or by supervisors or coworkers. And then also, if the employer pays the full wage for the job, but the person's productivity is lower than average, or they're not able to fully perform all the duties, or they're working more slowly than coworkers. The subsidy provided by the supported employment provider, as mentioned a moment ago, would be the extra help or supervision provided by the job coach. And that kind of subsidy is technically called a special condition. So, when we're documenting subsidies provided by employers, we always want to minimize the administrative tasks that we ask of employers, including things that have to do with benefits. So it's good if we or you as a benefit to work coach working with a supported employment provider can help the employer document those subsidies and make the task easier for them. Now, as a benefit to work coach working with a supported employment provider, you can either approach the employer directly to explain how the subsidy might help the individual keep their Title II benefit, or you can explain to another team member of the supported employment team how to present the idea of subsidies to the employer, what to say, what not to say, and of course to keep it simple. Now, subsidies provided by the supported employment provider, namely the job coaching, also called special conditions, have to be documented by the supported employment provider. And you can certainly have a role in that if you work for the supported employment provider. So, all in all, this puts you as a benefit to work coach working with the supported employment provider in a great position to document those subsidies and special conditions, both those provided by the employer and those provided by the supported employment provider. So as a benefit to work coach, you'll always provide a basic explanation of IRWEs and subsidies to individuals that you're serving, and you'll always refer them to a benefit planner if they may benefit from using IRWEs and subsidies and you think that IRWEs and or subsidies may exist. But you also have a role in helping document subsidies and in some cases IRWEs, particularly regarding subsidies if you work for or along with a supported employment provider. So here's an example. Here's Gladys, who gets SSDI. She starts a job working 32 hours a week and earns $11.25 an hour. That averages out to $1,559 a month gross wages. She used up her trial work period last year, and this is her first paid work since her last trial work month. She's not blind. She pays for copays for medications and therapy. She has a job coach who works with her. And in past jobs, she's tended to work more slowly than coworkers and needed some extra help from coworkers and supervisors to get the job done. But her employer values her work and the subtle extras she brings to the job and chooses to pay her the standard rate for her job despite the existence of subsidies. So, if you're Gladys's benefit to work coach and you work for the supported employment provider that serves Gladys, you would certainly refer her to a benefit planner after giving her a basic explanation of how IRWEs and subsidies could help keep her wages below SGA. But you would also collaborate with the benefit planner to identify and document potential IRWEs and especially subsidies. Now, the benefit planner would advise you to help Gladys gather proof of payment for the medication and therapy copays she's been paying, which are possible IRWEs. And the benefit planner would provide you with a template of a letter to document the special condition, the subsidy for job coaching, which the supported employment provider needs to verify. The benefit planner might also ask you, since you work for the supported employment provider, to speak with the employer or another member of the employment team to discuss with the employer possible subsidies and how they would work. And you could be in the position of helping the employer document those subsidies on the appropriate form, which we'll get to momentarily. And you, the benefit planner, and Gladys would jointly discuss whether the total IRWEs and possible subsidies appear sufficient to keep Gladys's countable wages below SGA so that her SSDI could continue. So, step one is that you'll collaborate with the benefit planner to determine whether IRWEs might be needed to help keep Gladys's wages below SGA. And the first question is, are her gross wages above the SGA level? In 2019, that's $1,220 a month for a non-blind person, and Gladys is not blind. If her earnings appear to be above SGA, without deductions like IRWEs and subsidies, then you'd certainly want to consider IRWEs. Step two is that you'd work with the benefit planner and with Gladys to identify potential IRWEs that Gladys is already paying for or will need to pay for when she starts working. So just a refresher, IRWEs usually have to meet 5 conditions. They're needed for work, but they may not be needed just for work. They could be expenses a person would pay for whether or not she was working, as long as they're needed at least partly for work. Secondly, they need to be needed due to the individual's disability of record, the disability for which they're receiving Title II benefits, or for another medical condition that's being treated by a licensed healthcare provider. Third, they need to be paid for out of pocket by the individual and not reimbursed by any other source. If there were an expense that the individual paid for and was partially reimbursed, let's say that their insurance reimbursed them 80% of the expense, the portion that they paid for and were not reimbursed for could still be an IRWE, in this case 20%. Fourth, an IRWE usually has to be paid for during a month in which the person is or was working, though there are exceptions. And fifth, the expense has to be of reasonable cost, basically the market rate. Now, Social Security doesn't keep a complete list of all possible IRWEs, which is a very good thing. They realize that there may be possible IRWEs that they've never thought of. So they give examples, but not an exhaustive list. And you can find some examples at the POMS reference with a link at the bottom of this slide. So some examples of IRWEs that might apply to people you're serving would be fees, including copays, for medical, psychiatric, psychological, or therapeutic services, fees including copays for prescription medications, service animal costs, for people who pay for a residential cost of care. In other words, if they pay for a portion of staff costs in their residential program, then a percentage of what they pay for staffing costs could be allowed as an IRWE, and it would be the portion of the cost of care that they pay for that would be reasonably related to helping the person prepare for work. Sometimes transportation costs can be allowed. Standard public transportation, the usual buses, would not be. If a person used, let's say, paratransit, door-to-door service, only for people with disabilities, that cost could be allowed as an IRWE. Let's suppose that an individual can't use public transportation due to a disability. They can't use the crowded buses due to anxiety or paranoia, but public transportation is available, although they're not able to use it for disability-related reasons. Then, if the person drives, because they can't use the public transportation for disability-related reasons, then their work-related mileage can be allowed as an IRWE at the IRS mileage rate, which is 58 cents a mile in 2019. Now, if the individual is transported by a family member, what they pay that family member for the transportation could be allowed as an IRWE, but there's a catch. In order for the expense to count as an IRWE, the family member would have to suffer economic loss as a result of providing that service. In other words, they would have to have foregone employment or cut back on employment or quit employment in order to transport the person with a disability. Only then could transportation provided by a family member be allowed as an IRWE. Now, step 3, if necessary, you, the benefit to work coach, will help the individual and or the benefit planner to document the IRWEs, getting receipts or other proof of payment together, possibly letters documenting that the expense is really disability related, and possibly helping to complete a work activity report - employee form, which helps document IRWEs as well. So let's get back to Gladys's particular situation. You and the benefit planner have determined that Gladys's gross monthly wages of $1,559 a month are clearly above the $1,220 a month SGA level. So you start to look at possible IRWEs. And the copays that she pays for medications and for therapy are possible IRWEs, and they total $80 a month. Gladys pulls together her receipts, and a benefit planner documents the IRWEs on the Work Activity Report - Employee, the SSA 821 form. But remember that an IRWE is not verified as an IRWE until Social Security has approved it during a work review. Next is identifying and documenting subsidies provided by supported employment providers, also known as special conditions. So step 1 in this process is for you to collaborate with a benefit planner to determine whether the special condition, the subsidy for supported employment, may be needed to keep wages below SGA. So the first question is, are gross wages above SGA after IRWEs have been subtracted? If yes, then you'll look into possible subsidies for supported employment. Step 2 is, does the person receive job coaching? If they do, then they have a special condition if Social Security approves. If not, then there will be no special condition. So back to Gladys. We started out with her $1,559 a month gross wages, subtracted her $80 a month IRWEs. The difference was $1,479 a month. That's still well above the $1,220 a month SGA level. So the benefit planner would provide you, the benefit to work coach who work with the supported employment provider, with a template of a letter to document the subsidy for job coaching, otherwise known as a special condition. And let's say that you work with Gladys and determine that she's going to be getting an average of 4 hours a week of job coaching. You next would, using the template that the benefit planner provided, complete a letter that explains that Gladys gets 4 hours a week or an average of 17 hours a month of job coaching to show the value of that job coaching as a special condition by taking the 17 hours a month and multiplying it by Gladys's hourly wage of $11.25 an hour, and that totals a special condition of $191 a month. And you would explain why the job coaching is needed because of Gladys's disability, needing more intensive instruction to learn job duties, needing frequent repetition of instructions, and perhaps assistance to interact appropriately with coworkers and supervisors. And then you would provide the completed letter to the benefit planner. The letter might look something like this. So it's on the letterhead for the supported employment provider. It's addressed to Social Security. It identifies the individual and her Social Security number. It explains what Gladys's work hours and earnings are, where she works. She receives job coaching and how many hours. It calculates a value for the special condition and explains why she needs the job coaching because of her disability. Okay. So, step one in identifying employer provider subsidies, now that we're done with the special condition for job coaching, is for you to collaborate with the benefit planner to determine whether an additional subsidy would be needed to keep wages below SGA. So you're asking, after subtracting the IRWEs and special conditions from Gladys's gross wages, would the difference be above or below $12.20 a month, the non-blind SGA level? If the gross wages are still above SGA even after those two subtractions, then you'd consider employer-provided subsidies. Step two is to ask the employer if they provide subsidies using a form called the Work Activity Questionnaire. That's the SSA 3033 form that's used for employers to document subsidies. And the benefit planner would provide that form to you. You would explain that, that form to the employer, explain that subsidies could possibly help the individual keep Social Security disability benefits, and ask them to complete the form. You'd help them complete the form. You'd ask if the person gets extra help or supervision on the job. It's provided by supervisors or coworkers. To ask if she's paid the customary wage for the job, but perhaps doesn't work at full productivity, maybe works more slowly than non-disabled coworkers, or can't fully perform all the duties of her job because of her disability. And if the employer says yes to any of those questions, then you'd go ahead and complete that work activity questionnaire, basically recording the information that the employer provides. Now, it's important to note that when you're helping the employer complete the work activity questionnaire, you don't coach them. You don't urge them what to say. For example, if they say, well, I think she might be working at 90% productivity, you don't want to say, well, if you said 80% productivity, she'd be able to keep her Social Security disability benefits. You want to just accurately report on the form the information that the employer answers to the questions. After the form's completed, you'll ask the employer to sign and date it and enter their phone number in section 3 of the form on page 2. So back to Gladys. We had already subtracted her $80 of IRWEs and $191 special condition from her $1,559 a month gross wages. The difference was still over SGA. It was $1,288 a month, still above the $1,220 a month SGA level. So now it's time to document employer-provided subsidies with that work activity questionnaire. And you're going to discuss that with the employer and complete section 1 of the form with the information the employer provides to you. Now, in this case, the employer is verifying that Gladys gets extra help from a supervisor, that she works more slowly than coworkers, and that after these subsidies are involved, her overall productivity is about 80% of the customary rate, but she's paid the full wage for her job. So if she works at 80% but gets paid 100%, then there's a 20% subsidy, and the form documents that. So the employer then signs, dates, and enters the phone number in section 3. You provide the completed form to the benefit planner, and then the benefit planner, during a work review, submits that form and documents the employer subsidy in that way. Now, the SSA 3033 form, the work activity questionnaire, looks like this. It documents business name, Gladys's job title, her hourly wage, her hours a week, when she started work, the fact that her work is continuing, and section 1 asks questions about her performance on the job, any special assistance that she gets, and item number 6 on page 2 is the most important, the percentage of her productivity relative to a non-disabled worker in the same job. And at the bottom, section 3 is where the supervisor or another official at the employer would sign, date, and enter a telephone number. Okay? So, as a benefit to work coach, you can help the benefit planner to evaluate whether IRWEs, subsidies, and special conditions may exist, and certainly if they're needed to help a person keep earnings below SGA. You're going to be especially helpful in identifying and documenting subsidies and special conditions, particularly if you work for or with the supported employment provider that serves the individual. Now, after deducting the existing IRWEs, subsidies, and special conditions, if all of those deductions combined are not enough to get the person's countable earnings below SGA, then you could discuss with the individual and the benefit planner whether additional IRWEs might get them below SGA. If there are other expenses they're not yet paying for, but could be paying for, that would be needed because of the disability or another medical condition that would improve their performance in their job. Now, suppose the person's current IRWEs, subsidies, and special conditions are sufficient to keep their earnings below SGA, but their wages are expected to increase in the future. They'll get an hourly wage increase, or perhaps they're expected to get more hours later on. And you want to consider whether the existing IRWEs, subsidies, and special conditions would still keep earnings below SGA after the wage increase, or whether they would need additional ones and whether additional ones might exist. It's a good idea for you to check in at least quarterly with the person to see if there have been any changes and to make sure that they're keeping receipts for all IRWEs. And if any changes have happened, you should remind the person to contact the benefit planner or yourself to reevaluate the impact of their countable wages after subtracting IRWEs, subsidies, and special conditions to make sure they're still below SGA and whether any changes need to be reported to Social Security. So finally, for Gladys, after subtracting the IRWEs, the special condition, and the employer subsidies, as mentioned, the employer subsidy would be 20% of Gladys's gross wages, or $312 a month. After all those subtractions, her countable earnings would be well below the $1,220 a month SGA level. They'd be down to below $1,000 a month at $976 a month. So you discussed that it appears that the IRWEs and subsidies would suffice to get her below SGA, but that Social Security needs to make that determination during a work review. You would remind Gladys to report any changes in her IRWEs, the amount of job coaching she gets, other extra help she gets on the job, or her work pace to the benefit planner. And you, the benefit to work coach, would check in with Gladys quarterly, make sure she's keeping her IRWE receipts, and see if there have been any changes. So in conclusion, your role is important in helping to identify and document IRWEs, subsidies, and special conditions, particularly subsidies and special conditions, even though that's primarily the responsibility of the benefit planner. If you work for or closely with the supported employment provider, that puts you in an especially good position to identify and document special conditions and employer subsidies. Now, you should speak with your supervisor about how you should collaborate with the benefit planner to help identify and document IRWEs, subsidies, and special conditions. But there's definitely a role for you in this, very important role. Thank you very much for participating in this webinar.